In the quiet, dimly lit corners of a Seattle apartment, a story unfolds that delves into the complexities of love, betrayal, and redemption. Join us as we explore the heartfelt journey of David and Sarah, a couple whose relationship is tested by infidelity. Through moments of raw emotion and sincere efforts to rebuild trust, their story reveals the resilience of the human heart and the power of forgiveness. Prepare to be moved by a tale that proves even the deepest wounds can heal with unwavering commitment and love. The late-night glow of the TV flickered across the dimly lit living room, casting long shadows on the walls of David and Sarah's cozy Seattle apartment. It was just past midnight in November 2019, a time usually reserved for the quiet comfort of lovers entwined on the couch. However, tonight, the atmosphere was starkly different. David, a burly man with a gentle demeanor shaped by his Midwest upbringing, sat alone on one side of the sofa, nursing a lukewarm beer. His mind was not on the action thriller unfolding on the screen but on the unusual silence that filled the room. The apartment was a quaint space, filled with personal touches that reflected their 9 years together. Pictures of vacations, family gatherings, and moments of pure joy adorned the walls. The smell of Sarah's favorite lavender-scented candles mixed with the faint aroma of the pasta they had for dinner. The soft hum of the refrigerator was the only sound accompanying the muted TV. Sarah, his partner of nearly a decade, had recently switched to early morning shifts at her new IT job, which often left her exhausted by the end of the day. But tonight, her energy seemed mysteriously replenished. The sound of her hushed voice drifted from the kitchen where she stood, phone pressed against her ear, her whispers punctuating the stillness of the night. She stood by the counter, twirling the phone cord around her finger in a way that seemed too familiar and intimate for a mere work call. Curiosity overcame David's better judgment, and he muted the television, straining to catch snippets of Sarah's conversation. He could only make out fragments. "Yes, I'll be there early. Can't wait," followed by a soft giggle that he hadn't heard in months. His heart sank. That giggle was once reserved for him, a private symphony of their shared humor and love. Now, it was a stranger's. Feeling a knot tighten in his stomach, David waited until Sarah rounded the corner, phone still in hand, looking as though she'd just been caught in a lie. Their eyes met briefly, and a forced smile played on her lips before she retreated to the bedroom, continuing her conversation in hushed tones. David remained motionless, the silence of the apartment now deafening. The change in her demeanor was palpable, and it sent a chill through David's spine. They had been each other's rock, especially after David's construction company had taken a hit during the pandemic, leaving him to lean heavily on Sarah for emotional support. Now, with her secretive calls and sudden nighttime chats, doubt crept into his mind, planting seeds of mistrust. David's thoughts raced as he tried to rationalize the situation. Was he overreacting? Was there a reasonable explanation for Sarah's behavior? He replayed the past few months in his mind, searching for clues he might have missed. The late-night phone calls, the sudden need for privacy, the unexplained absences, they all pointed to something more than just a stressful job. Unable to shake the feeling that something was amiss, David decided to confront the situation head-on. He rehearsed his words, each one heavier than the last. When Sarah finally reappeared, her face was flushed, her eyes avoiding his probing gaze. "Who were you talking to at this hour?" David's voice was more curious than confrontational, but it carried an undercurrent of hurt. "It's just Lisa from work," Sarah replied quickly, too quickly. "She's been having a tough time with the new project manager." David nodded, though her answer did little to ease his concerns. The name, Lisa, didn't ring any bells, and his familiarity with Sarah's colleagues didn't align with her explanation. He decided to push a little further. "And what's got you both talking so late?" It sounded important, he probed, trying to keep his tone light. Sarah paused, her fingers nervously tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "Just work stuff, you know? The usual chaos." Her attempt at nonchalance did not match the anxious tilt of her shoulders. The conversation dwindled into an awkward silence, with both retreating into their thoughts. David watched as Sarah busied herself around the living room, avoiding further discussion. The distance between them felt wider than the room itself. Later that night, as Sarah took her shower, her phone buzzed incessantly on the coffee table. David's gaze was drawn to it, a battle raging within him. Trust was the foundation of their relationship, but the growing pit in his stomach urged him to act. He reached for the phone just as a message lit up the screen. "Can't stop thinking about you." The world around David slowed as he opened the message thread. His heart pounded against his ribs like a drum, each beat echoing the betrayal he felt as he scrolled through months of messages. The playful banter, the intimate plans, the outright declarations of desire, each word a dagger to his heart. As the shower turned off, David sat frozen, the phone heavy in his hand. He was faced with a choice that would redefine the boundaries of their relationship and possibly its future. As Sarah re-entered the room, the look on her face when she saw him holding her phone said everything words could not. The night ended not with a confrontation, but with a heavy silence that settled over their home like a shroud. David lay awake, the ghosts of the messages haunting him, as he pondered the unfamiliar distance now wedged firmly between him and the woman he loved. The days following the discovery of Sarah's texts were thick with tension. David, racked by betrayal yet bound by love, grappled with the overwhelming desire to confront Sarah and the crippling fear of what such a confrontation might bring. The silent meals and the cold distance that had taken residence between them were punctuated only by Sarah's occasional, strained attempts at normalcy, which David met with nodding acceptance but a heart full of turmoil. David's thoughts spiraled as he tried to understand how they had reached this point. He remembered the early days of their relationship, filled with laughter, passion, and a deep connection that seemed unbreakable. They had weathered storms before, but this felt different. The foundation of trust they had built over the years now felt like it was crumbling beneath him. One evening, a few days after the discovery, David sat on the couch, staring blankly at the TV. Sarah was in the kitchen, making dinner. The smell of her homemade lasagna, once his favorite, now seemed to mock him with memories of happier times. He knew he couldn't keep pretending everything was fine. He needed answers. "Sarah," he called out, his voice wavering slightly. "We need to talk." Sarah paused, her back to him as she stirred the sauce. "About what?" she asked, her tone cautious. David took a deep breath, his mind racing with 1,000 thoughts. "About us. About what's been happening. I can't keep ignoring it." Sarah turned to face him, her eyes filled with a mix of fear and defiance. "David, I told you, it's just work stress. I'm sorry if I've been distant, but you need to trust me." David shook his head, feeling the weight of the words he was about to speak. "I want to trust you, Sarah. But I saw the messages. I saw everything." The color drained from Sarah's face as she took a step back, her hands trembling. "You went through my phone?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I had to know," David replied, his own voice breaking. "I had to know if I was losing you." Sarah sank into a chair, her eyes welling up with tears. "David, I never meant for this to happen. It started as a distraction, something to take my mind off the stress. But then it became more." David's heart shattered as he watched her crumble before him. "Why didn't you talk to me? Why didn't you let me in?" "I was scared," Sarah admitted, her voice choked with emotion. "Scared that I was losing you, too. We've both been so caught up in our own struggles that we stopped being there for each other." The room fell silent as the weight of their unspoken pain hung heavy in the air. David moved to sit beside Sarah, taking her hand in his. "We need to fix this," he said softly. "I don't know how, but we have to try." Sarah nodded, her tears falling freely now. "I want to, David. I want us to find our way back to each other." The conversation that followed was filled with raw honesty and vulnerability. They talked about their fears, their failures, and the love that had once been the cornerstone of their relationship. It was a start, a small step toward healing, but it was enough to give them both a glimmer of hope. That night, for the first time in months, David and Sarah held each other close, the barriers between them slowly beginning to crumble. It would be a long and difficult journey, but they were willing to face it together, one step at a time. David sat on the couch, the television casting a soft glow over the room. The action movie playing in the background was merely a distraction, his mind preoccupied with the recent revelations. His thoughts swirled in a chaotic mess of hurt and confusion. How had they come to this point? The past few days had been a blur of silence and strained interactions, each one a painful reminder of the distance now between them. Sarah was in the kitchen, moving about with a kind of nervous energy that seemed to fill the space between them. She busied herself with preparing dinner, her movements deliberate and methodical, as if focusing on the task at hand could somehow erase the tension that hung heavy in the air. David's thoughts drifted back to the night he discovered the messages. The look on Sarah's face when she realized he had seen them was etched into his memory, a mix of guilt and sorrow that mirrored his own feelings of betrayal and confusion. He couldn't shake the image from his mind, nor the nagging questions that had plagued him since. Was there more to the story than what he had seen? Had their relationship been deteriorating for longer than he realized? The doubts gnawed at him, each one a painful thorn in his side. David, Sarah's voice broke through his thoughts, pulling him back to the present. He looked up to see her standing in the doorway, a plate of pasta in her hands. Dinner's ready. He nodded, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Thanks, Sarah. They sat at the small dining table, the clinking of silverware the only sound between them. The silence was thick, almost suffocating, and David found himself struggling to find the words to bridge the gap. Finally, he set down his fork and looked at Sarah, his expression earnest. We need to talk. Sarah glanced up, her eyes wide with apprehension. About what? About us, David said, his voice steady but filled with an underlying tension. About what's been happening. Sarah sighed, her shoulders slumping slightly. David, I already told you, it's just work stress. Things have been crazy at the office, and I guess I've been taking it out on you. David shook his head, his frustration bubbling to the surface. I don't buy that, Sarah. This isn't just about work. I've seen the messages. I know something's going on. Sarah's face paled, and she looked away, her fingers nervously toying with the edge of the tablecloth. I never wanted to hurt you, David. Then why? David's voice was a mixture of pain and anger. Why didn't you talk to me? Why did you feel the need to keep secrets? Tears welled up in Sarah's eyes, and she took a deep breath, her voice trembling. I was scared. Scared that you wouldn't understand, that you would judge me. And I felt so alone, David. We both have been so distant, caught up in our own worlds. David's heart ached at her words, a mixture of guilt and sorrow washing over him. Sarah, I love you. We've been through so much together. I don't want to lose you, but I need to know the truth. All of it. Sarah wiped her eyes, her hands trembling. It started as a distraction, something to take my mind off the stress. But then it became more. I know it was wrong, and I regret it deeply. I never meant for it to go this far. David listened, his own emotions a turbulent storm inside him. Is it over? He asked quietly. Is there still something between you and whoever it is? It's over, Sarah said firmly, her eyes meeting his. I ended it. I want to make things right between us, David. I want to fix this. David nodded, feeling a flicker of hope. I want that too, Sarah. But it's going to take time. Trust has been broken, and we need to rebuild it. I know, Sarah whispered, reaching across the table to take his hand. I'm willing to do whatever it takes. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of their words settling between them. It was a small step, but it was a step in the right direction. David knew that the road ahead would be difficult, filled with challenges and uncertainties, but he was willing to face it with Sarah by his side. As they finished dinner, the atmosphere between them was still tense, but there was a glimmer of hope. They cleared the table together, their movements tentative but synchronized, a silent acknowledgement of their shared commitment to make things work. Later that night, as they lay in bed, David stared at the ceiling, his mind racing with thoughts of the future. He turned to Sarah, who was lying beside him, her breathing steady and calm. He reached out and took her hand, squeezing it gently. We're going to get through this, he whispered, more to himself than to her. Together. Sarah squeezed his hand back, her eyes meeting his in the dim light. Together, she echoed, a small but genuine smile on her lips. David felt a sense of resolve settling over him. It wouldn't be easy, and there would be days when the hurt and doubt would resurface, but he was determined to rebuild what they had lost. For the first time in weeks, he felt a glimmer of hope for their future. The chill of the November air seeped into the apartment, a stark contrast to the tension that simmered between David and Sarah. The days had grown shorter, and the early darkness seemed to cast a perpetual shadow over their home. David found himself spending more time in their living room, surrounded by the memories they had built together, photographs from vacations, mementos from their travels, and the framed picture from their anniversary trip to Hawaii. Yet, these tokens of happier times now felt like relics of a distant past. Sarah's behavior had grown increasingly erratic since their confrontation. She was more reserved, her laughter subdued and her presence a mere shadow of the vibrant woman David had fallen in love with. The silence between them was heavy, filled with unspoken words and unresolved tension. One evening, as Sarah prepared for bed, David sat in the living room, his thoughts a whirlpool of doubt and suspicion. The conversation they had shared days ago lingered in his mind, but it had done little to assuage his fears. He needed more than words. He needed proof that their relationship could be salvaged. Sarah's phone buzzed on the coffee table, drawing David's attention. He glanced toward the bedroom, hearing the faint sound of the shower running. His heart pounded in his chest as he reached for the phone, a battle raging within him. Trust was the foundation of their relationship, but the growing pit in his stomach urged him to act. With trembling hands, David unlocked the phone, his breath catching as he scrolled through the messages. His heart sank as he saw the same familiar name, *** Jake. The messages were filled with playful banter, intimate plans, and outright declarations of desire. Each word was a dagger to his heart, a painful reminder of the betrayal he felt. "Can't stop thinking about you." The message glowed on the screen, a cruel testament to his deepest fears. David's vision blurred with tears as he read through the conversation, his mind racing with a mix of anger, sorrow, and disbelief. How could Sarah do this to him? How had they fallen so far apart? As the shower turned off, David sat frozen, the phone heavy in his hand. He was faced with a choice that would redefine the boundaries of their relationship and possibly its future. The sound of Sarah's footsteps grew louder, and he quickly locked the phone, setting it back on the table. Sarah entered the room, her hair damp and a towel wrapped around her. Her eyes widened when she saw David sitting there, his expression a mix of hurt and anger. "David, what's wrong?" she asked, her voice laced with concern. David looked up, his eyes meeting hers with a cold intensity. "Who is Jake?" he demanded, his voice trembling with emotion. Sarah's face paled, and she took a step back, her eyes darting to the phone on the table. "David, I can explain." "Explain what?" David interrupted, his voice rising. "Explain how you've been lying to me. How you've been carrying on with someone else behind my back." Tears filled Sarah's eyes as she shook her head. "It's not what you think, David. Jake is just a friend, someone I confided in when things got tough." "A friend?" David scoffed, his anger bubbling to the surface. "A friend you send intimate messages to? A friend you plan secret meetings with?" Sarah's tears spilled over as she reached out to him, her voice pleading. "David, please, let me explain. I know I've made mistakes, but it was never about wanting to hurt you. I was lonely, and I felt like you weren't there for me." David's heart ached at her words, but his anger and betrayal were too fresh. "I was always here, Sarah. Maybe I wasn't perfect, but I was always here for you. And this is how you repay me?" Sarah's shoulders shook with sobs as she fell to her knees, her hands clasped in front of her. "I'm sorry, David. I'm so sorry. I never meant for it to go this far. I ended it with Jake. I want to make things right between us." David looked down at her, his own tears blurring his vision. He wanted to believe her, wanted to hold on to the love they had shared. But the pain was too deep, the betrayal too raw. "I don't know if I can get past this, Sarah. I don't know if I can ever trust you again." Sarah's sobs grew louder, her words choked with emotion. "Please, David, give me a chance. Let's go to counseling, let's talk to someone. I don't want to lose you. I love you." David took a step back, his mind a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. He knew he needed time to process everything, to decide what their future would hold. I need some space, Sarah. I need time to think. Sarah nodded, her sobs subsiding into quiet sniffles. Take all the time you need, David. I'll do whatever it takes to make things right. David turned and walked out of the living room, his heart heavy with the weight of their fractured relationship. He needed to clear his head, to find a way to navigate the storm of emotions that threatened to overwhelm him. As he stepped out into the cold November night, the chill air biting at his skin, David felt a sense of desolation settle over him. The road ahead was uncertain, filled with pain and doubt. But as he walked, he knew that he needed to find a way to heal, whether that meant repairing their relationship or finding the strength to move on alone. The next few days were an emotional whirlwind for David. He found himself vacillating between anger, sadness, and a deep sense of betrayal. Every corner of their apartment reminded him of the life he and Sarah had built together, now overshadowed by the stark reality of her infidelity. The living room, once a sanctuary of warmth and comfort, felt cold and uninviting. The framed photos on the walls, once symbols of their happiest moments, now seemed to mock him with memories of a time that felt irretrievably lost. Sarah's presence in the apartment was almost ghost-like. She moved quietly, avoiding eye contact and keeping her distance. The tension between them was palpable, filling every room with a heavy silence that neither knew how to break. One evening, after another silent dinner, David found himself sitting on the edge of their bed, staring at the photo of their anniversary trip to Hawaii. He remembered the joy they had shared, the laughter, and the love that had seemed so unbreakable. The memory felt like a cruel contrast to their current reality. Sarah entered the bedroom, her face drawn and tired. She paused at the doorway, her eyes pleading as she looked at David. "Can we talk?" she asked softly, her voice trembling with emotion. David nodded, his heart heavy. "Yeah, we need to." Sarah sat down on the bed next to him, the distance between them feeling like a chasm. "David, I know I've hurt you deeply, and I'm so sorry for that. I don't know how to make it right, but I want to try." David sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I just don't understand, Sarah. We've been through so much together. How did we end up here?" Sarah's eyes filled with tears as she took a deep breath. "I felt so alone, David. You were always so busy with work, and when you were home, it felt like you weren't really here. I know that's no excuse, but I was struggling, and I didn't know how to reach out to you." David's heart ached at her words, a mix of guilt and sorrow washing over him. "I'm sorry if I made you feel that way. I was dealing with my own stress, and I should have been more present for you. But you should have talked to me, Sarah. Instead, you turned to someone else." Sarah nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I know, and I regret it every day. I made a terrible mistake, and I hate myself for it. I ended things with Jake because I realized how much I love you and how much I want to make this work." David looked at her, his eyes filled with pain. "I want to believe you, Sarah. But trust is something that takes years to build and seconds to break. I don't know how to move past this." Sarah reached out, taking his hand in hers. "I'm willing to do whatever it takes, David. Counseling, therapy, anything. I want to rebuild our trust, piece by piece. Please, give me a chance." David looked down at their joined hands, feeling the warmth of her touch. He wanted to believe her, to hold on to the love they had shared for so long. But the fear of being hurt again was overwhelming. "I need time, Sarah. Time to heal, time to figure out if I can move past this." Sarah nodded, her grip on his hand tightening. "Take all the time you need. I'll be here, waiting, and I'll do everything I can to show you that I'm committed to making things right." David felt a flicker of hope, but it was faint and fragile. "I appreciate that, Sarah. I do. But this isn't something that can be fixed overnight. It's going to take a lot of work, from both of us." Sarah smiled through her tears, a glimmer of hope in her eyes. "I'm ready to put in the work, David. I love you, and I'm not giving up on us." David nodded, feeling a tentative sense of resolve. "Okay, let's take it one step at a time and see where it leads us." The days that followed were a delicate dance of cautious re-engagement. David and Sarah began to have more open conversations, addressing the issues that had led to their current crisis. They agreed to start couples counseling, hoping that a neutral third party could help them navigate the complex emotions and rebuild their fractured relationship. Their first counseling session was a mixture of apprehension and tentative hope. They sat side by side in the therapist's cozy office, the neutral decor and soft lighting designed to put clients at ease. Dr. Thompson, a kind-faced woman in her 50s, welcomed them with a warm smile. "Welcome, David and Sarah," she said, her voice soothing. "I'm glad you're both here. The fact that you're willing to seek help is a positive step. Let's start by talking about what brought you here today." David glanced at Sarah before speaking. "We've been together for 9 years, but recently we've hit a major rough patch." "Sarah, she had an affair, and it's torn us apart." Dr. Thompson nodded, her expression empathetic. "Infidelity is a significant breach of trust and can be incredibly painful." "Sarah, would you like to share your perspective?" Sarah took a deep breath, her voice trembling. "I made a terrible mistake. I was feeling lonely and disconnected from David, and I sought comfort in someone else. I regret it deeply, and I want to do whatever it takes to make things right." Dr. Thompson leaned forward slightly, her eyes kind. "Thank you for sharing that, Sarah. It's important to acknowledge the pain and the mistakes, but also to understand the underlying issues that led to this situation." "David, how are you feeling about what Sarah has shared?" David sighed, struggling to put his emotions into words. "I'm hurt and angry. I feel betrayed. But I also know that we both had a part in letting things get to this point. I want to try and move past this, but I don't know how." Dr. Thompson nodded thoughtfully. "It's natural to feel a wide range of emotions. Healing from infidelity is a process that involves both partners. It's about rebuilding trust, understanding each other's needs, and fostering open communication. Are you both willing to commit to this process?" David and Sarah exchanged a glance, then nodded in unison. "Yes," they said together, their voices filled with a mix of determination and uncertainty. Dr. Thompson smiled. "That's a good start. We'll work together to address the pain and rebuild your relationship. It won't be easy, but with commitment and effort, it's possible to come out stronger on the other side." As they left the therapist's office, David felt a flicker of hope. The road ahead was uncertain, and the wounds were still fresh, but they were taking steps towards healing. It was a long journey, and they had only just begun. That night, as they lay in bed, David turned to Sarah, his voice soft. "I'm willing to give this a try, Sarah. But it's going to take time, and it's going to be hard." Sarah nodded, her eyes filled with gratitude. "I know, David, and I'm willing to do whatever it takes. I love you, and I'm not giving up on us." David reached out, taking her hand in his. It was a small gesture, but it carried a weight of promise and commitment. They had a long way to go, but for the first time in a while, David felt a glimmer of hope for their future. The autumn chill had deepened as November drew to a close, and the first whispers of winter began to drift through the streets of Seattle. The city, known for its rain and gray skies, seemed a fitting backdrop for the emotional turbulence that David and Sarah were navigating. Their apartment, once a haven of warmth and love, had become a place of tentative steps and cautious conversations. David awoke one Saturday morning to the sound of rain tapping gently against the window. He turned over to see Sarah still asleep, her face peaceful in slumber. For a moment, he allowed himself to remember the early days of their relationship, when they would spend lazy weekends wrapped up in each other, the world outside forgotten. But those days felt like a distant memory now, replaced by the stark reality of their present. He sighed and quietly slipped out of bed, careful not to wake Sarah. In the kitchen, he began to make coffee, the familiar routine providing a small sense of comfort. As the rich aroma filled the air, he found himself lost in thought. Their first counseling session had been a step in the right direction, but it was clear that the road to healing would be long and fraught with challenges. David knew that rebuilding trust would require more than just words. It would take consistent effort and a willingness to confront their deepest fears and insecurities. As he poured himself a cup of coffee, he heard soft footsteps behind him. He turned to see Sarah standing in the doorway, her hair tousled from sleep and her eyes still heavy with drowsiness. She offered him a small, tentative smile. "Morning," she said softly, her voice tinged with uncertainty. "Morning, David replied, forcing a smile. I made coffee. Want some? Sarah nodded and took a seat at the kitchen table. David poured her a cup and set it down in front of her before joining her at the table. They sat in silence for a moment, the rain outside providing a soothing backdrop. David, I've been thinking, Sarah began, her fingers nervously tracing the rim of her mug. About what Dr. Thompson said. About finding ways to reconnect. David nodded, his heart heavy with a mix of hope and apprehension. Yeah, I've been thinking about that too. Sarah took a deep breath, her eyes meeting his. I want us to try something. Something to help us remember why we fell in love in the first place. I was thinking we could start by doing things we used to enjoy together. You know, like going for a walk in the park or cooking a meal together. David's heart ached at the sincerity in her eyes. He wanted to believe that they could find their way back to each other, but the fear of being hurt again loomed large. That sounds like a good idea, he said finally, his voice steady. I think we need to start somewhere, and that seems as good a place as any. Sarah smiled, relief washing over her features. How about we start today? There's a new exhibit at the art museum downtown. We used to love going to those. David hesitated for a moment, then nodded. Okay, let's do it. Later that afternoon, they found themselves walking through the halls of the Seattle Art Museum. The familiar smell of polished wood and the quiet hum of hushed conversations surrounded them. David glanced at Sarah, noticing the way her eyes lit up as she examined each piece of art. It was a look he hadn't seen in a long time, and it stirred something deep within him. They stopped in front of a large abstract painting, its bold colors and sweeping lines evoking a sense of movement and energy. Sarah turned to David, her eyes shining with excitement. What do you think of this one? She asked, her voice filled with genuine curiosity. David studied the painting, allowing himself to be drawn into its vibrant depths. I like it, he said after a moment. It's chaotic, but there's a certain beauty in the chaos. It reminds me of how life can be sometimes. Sarah smiled, her eyes softening. Yeah, it does. I think that's why I like it too. It's a reminder that even in the midst of chaos, there's beauty to be found. They continued to wander through the museum, their conversation flowing more easily as they shared their thoughts and impressions of the artwork. It felt like a small step towards rebuilding the connection that had once been so strong between them. After leaving the museum, they decided to stop by a small cafe they used to frequent. The cozy atmosphere and the familiar smell of freshly baked pastries brought back a flood of memories. They found a corner table and settled in, the tension between them easing slightly. Do you remember the first time we came here? Sarah asked, her eyes twinkling with nostalgia. We spent hours talking and laughing. It felt like we were the only two people in the world. David nodded, a small smile tugging at his lips. Yeah, I remember. We talked about everything and nothing. It was one of the best dates we ever had. Sarah reached across the table, her hand finding his. I miss that, David. I miss us. David squeezed her hand, feeling a flicker of hope. I miss us too, Sarah. I want to get back to that place. I know it's going to take time, but I'm willing to try. Sarah's eyes filled with tears, but she smiled through them. Thank you, David. That means more to me than you know. The rest of the day passed in a blur of tentative steps and small gestures of affection. They cooked dinner together, laughing as they navigated the cramped kitchen. It felt like a glimpse of the life they once had, and it gave David a glimmer of hope that maybe, just maybe, they could find their way back to each other. As they sat down to eat, David raised his glass, his eyes meeting Sarah's. To new beginnings, he said softly, his voice filled with a mixture of hope and determination. Sarah smiled, clinking her glass against his. To new beginnings, she echoed. That night, as they lay in bed, David felt a sense of peace that had eluded him for weeks. The road ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, he felt that they were moving in the right direction. He wrapped his arm around Sarah, pulling her close. She nestled against him, her breathing steady and calm. We're going to make it through this, David whispered, his voice filled with quiet resolve. Together. Sarah nodded, her voice barely a whisper. Together. In the weeks that followed, David and Sarah continued to make small but significant strides towards rebuilding their relationship. They attended counseling sessions regularly, each one a step towards healing. They made an effort to spend more quality time together, rediscovering the things that had brought them joy in the early days of their relationship. One evening, after a particularly emotional counseling session, David and Sarah found themselves sitting on the couch, a bottle of wine between them. The conversation had been raw and painful, but it had also been a necessary part of their journey. "David," Sarah said softly, breaking the silence. "I know I've said this before, but I want you to know how deeply sorry I am for what I did. I hurt you in a way that I can't even begin to fathom, and I will regret that for the rest of my life." David looked at her, his heart aching at the sincerity in her eyes. "I know, Sarah, and I appreciate your apology. It means a lot to me. But we both have to be willing to move forward, to forgive and let go of the past." Sarah nodded, her eyes filled with determination. "I'm ready, David. I want to build a future with you, one that's stronger and more resilient than before. I love you, and I'm not giving up on us." David reached out, taking her hand in his. "I love you too, Sarah. And I'm willing to fight for us, for our future. It's not going to be easy, but I believe we can do it." Sarah squeezed his hand, a small smile playing on her lips. "Together, we can do anything." As they sat there, hand in hand, David felt a renewed sense of hope. The journey ahead was still uncertain, but with Sarah by his side, he knew they had the strength to face whatever challenges lay ahead. For the first time in a long time, he felt that their love was worth fighting for, and that together, they could overcome anything. December in Seattle brought a crisp chill to the air, with the promise of snow lingering in the overcast sky. The city's holiday decorations added a festive glow to the otherwise gray surroundings, and the scent of pine and cinnamon seemed to waft through the streets. Despite the season's cheer, David and Sarah's apartment remained a place of cautious optimism and ongoing efforts to rebuild their relationship. The counseling sessions with Dr. Thompson had become a regular part of their routine, providing a safe space to express their emotions and work through their issues. David found these sessions both draining and enlightening, often leaving with a mix of hope and exhaustion. Sarah, too, seemed more at ease after each session, her determination to mend their bond evident in her actions. One Friday evening, as the city outside buzzed with holiday preparations, David and Sarah sat on the couch, a fire crackling in the fireplace. The warmth of the flames contrasted with the cold outside, creating a cozy atmosphere that felt almost like old times. David handed Sarah a cup of hot cocoa, topped with whipped cream and a sprinkle of cinnamon, her favorite. "Thanks, David," Sarah said, her smile genuine as she took the cup from him. "This brings back memories." David nodded, a small smile tugging at his lips. "Yeah, it does. Remember the first winter we spent together here? We built that terrible snowman outside, and it collapsed within an hour." Sarah laughed, the sound light and genuine. "I remember. We tried so hard to make it look perfect, but it ended up looking like a lopsided marshmallow." David chuckled, the memory warming his heart. "We were a mess, but it was fun. We should do it again sometime." "I'd like that," Sarah replied softly, her eyes meeting his with a mixture of hope and gratitude. As the evening wore on, they found themselves reminiscing about happier times, their conversation flowing more naturally than it had in months. It felt like a small victory, a reminder of the connection they had once shared. However, despite these moments of closeness, the underlying tension still remained. David often found himself lost in thought, grappling with the memories of Sarah's infidelity and the trust that had been shattered. He knew that rebuilding their relationship would take time and effort, but the path ahead seemed daunting. One night, as they lay in bed, David stared at the ceiling, his mind racing with doubts and fears. He turned to Sarah, who was lying beside him, her breathing steady and calm. "Sarah," he whispered, his voice barely audible in the quiet room. Sarah stirred, turning to face him. "What is it, David?" David hesitated, searching for the right words. "Do you ever worry that we won't be able to move past this? That no matter how hard we try, things will never be the same?" Sarah's eyes softened, and she reached out to take his hand. "I do worry, David. Every day. But I also believe that we have the strength to overcome this. We've been through so much together, and I don't want to give up on us. I'm willing to fight for our future. David squeezed her hand, feeling a flicker of hope. I'm willing to fight too, Sarah. But sometimes, it feels like we're just pretending, like we're trying to force something that's already broken. Sarah's eyes filled with tears, and she nodded. I know it feels that way sometimes. But I believe that if we keep working at it, if we keep being honest with each other, we can find our way back. It won't be easy, but nothing worth having ever is. David sighed, his heart heavy with the weight of their shared struggles. You're right. It's just hard to see the light at the end of the tunnel sometimes. Sarah leaned in, pressing a gentle kiss to his forehead. We'll find it, David. Together, one step at a time. The following week, during one of their counseling sessions, Dr. Thompson suggested an exercise to help them reconnect. I want you both to write letters to each other, she said, her tone encouraging. Write about your feelings, your fears, your hopes for the future. Share whatever is in your heart. It's a way to communicate in a different format and to express things you might find difficult to say out loud. David and Sarah exchanged glances, both feeling a mix of apprehension and curiosity. They agreed to the exercise, each taking a notebook to begin their letters. That evening, David sat at the kitchen table, a pen in hand and a blank page before him. He stared at the paper, his mind a whirlwind of thoughts and emotions. He took a deep breath and began to write. Dear Sarah, this letter feels like one of the hardest things I've ever had to write. I have so many conflicting emotions: love, anger, pain, hope. I'm still struggling to understand how we got here, how something so beautiful could become so fractured. I want you to know that I love you, despite everything. I love the way you smile, the way you laugh, the way you make me feel when we're together. But I'm also hurt, deeply hurt by what happened. It's hard to trust again, to believe that we can rebuild what was broken. I miss the days when we were inseparable, when we could talk for hours about anything and everything. I miss the closeness we shared, the way we used to finish each other's sentences. I want to find our way back to that place, but I know it's going to take time and effort from both of us. I'm willing to fight for us, Sarah. I'm willing to put in the work, to face the pain and the uncertainty, because I believe that what we have is worth saving. I believe that we can come out of this stronger and more resilient than before. Thank you for not giving up on us. Thank you for being willing to face this journey with me. I know it won't be easy, but with your support, I believe we can overcome anything. Love, David. David set down his pen, feeling a mixture of relief and anxiety. He hoped that his words would convey the depth of his feelings, the complexity of his emotions. He folded the letter and placed it in an envelope, ready to share it with Sarah the next day. The next evening, David and Sarah sat across from each other in the living room, their letters in hand. The air was thick with anticipation, each of them wondering what the other had written. Ready? David asked, his voice steady despite the nervousness he felt. Sarah nodded, her eyes filled with determination. Ready. They exchanged letters, their fingers brushing briefly as they made the handoff. David took a deep breath and unfolded Sarah's letter, his heart pounding in his chest. Dear David, this letter is incredibly difficult for me to write, but I know it's important. I want to start by saying how deeply sorry I am for the pain I've caused you. I know that my actions have hurt you in ways that words can't fully express, and I will carry that regret with me always. I want you to know that I love you more than anything. You've been my rock, my partner, my best friend. The thought of losing you is unbearable, and I am committed to doing whatever it takes to rebuild our relationship. I've been thinking a lot about what went wrong, about how we drifted apart. I know that I should have talked to you, should have reached out when I was feeling lonely and disconnected. Instead, I made a terrible mistake, one that I will always regret. I miss the closeness we shared, the way we used to laugh and talk for hours. I want to find our way back to that place, to rebuild the trust and the bond that we once had. I know it won't be easy, and I know it will take time, but I believe we can do it. Thank you for being willing to fight for us. Thank you for your love, your patience, and your strength. I believe that together, we can overcome this and come out stronger on the other side. Love, Sarah. David felt tears welling up in his eyes as he finished reading the letter. He looked up at Sarah, seeing the same emotion reflected in her gaze. "Thank you for your honesty, Sarah," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "I believe we can do this too." Sarah reached across the table, taking his hand in hers. "One step at a time, David. We'll get there." The exchange of letters marked a turning point in their journey. It wasn't a cure-all, but it was a step towards healing, a way to bridge the gap that had formed between them. They continued to attend counseling, to work on their communication, and to find new ways to reconnect. As the holidays approached, David and Sarah decided to take a trip to a cabin in the mountains, a place where they could escape the city and focus on each other. The cabin was nestled in a snowy landscape, surrounded by towering pine trees and the quiet beauty of nature. One evening, as they sat by the fire, David turned to Sarah, his heart filled with a mixture of hope and determination. "Sarah, I want to thank you for not giving up on us. For being willing to face this journey with me." Sarah smiled, her eyes shining with gratitude. "Thank you, David, for believing in us, even when it was hard." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the crackling fire providing a soothing backdrop. David felt a sense of peace settle over him, a feeling that they were finally on the right path. "Let's make a promise," Sarah said suddenly, her voice soft but firm. "Let's promise to always communicate, to always be honest with each other, no matter how hard it is." David nodded, feeling the weight of her words. "I promise, Sarah. I promise to always be honest, to always communicate. No more secrets." Sarah smiled, leaning in to kiss him gently. No more secrets. As they sat together, watching the flames dance in the fireplace, David felt a renewed sense of hope for their future. The road ahead was still uncertain, but with Sarah by his side, he knew they had the strength to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Together, they could rebuild their relationship, one step at a time. The cabin in the mountains became a sanctuary for David and Sarah, a place where they could escape the stresses of their everyday lives and focus on healing their relationship. The quiet solitude of the snowy landscape provided a peaceful backdrop for their efforts to reconnect. Each day, they took long walks through the pine forests, the crisp winter air invigorating and refreshing. One morning, after a particularly heavy snowfall, David suggested they build a snowman, a callback to their first winter together. Sarah agreed, her eyes sparkling with excitement. They bundled up in warm clothes and ventured outside, the fresh snow crunching under their boots. As they worked together to roll the large snowballs and stack them into the shape of a snowman, their laughter echoed through the stillness of the forest. For a few hours, it felt like they had recaptured a piece of their past, the joy and spontaneity that had once defined their relationship. "Remember how our first snowman turned out?" David asked, shaping the head of the snowman with his gloved hands. Sarah giggled, adjusting the scarf around the snowman's neck. "How could I forget? It looked like a lopsided marshmallow." David laughed, the sound warming his heart. "This one's much better. We're getting the hang of it." As they finished their creation, they stood back to admire their work. The snowman stood proudly, adorned with a carrot nose, pebble eyes, and a hat David had brought from the cabin. It was a small but significant victory, a reminder of the simple joys they could still share. Inside the cabin, they warmed up by the fire with mugs of hot cocoa, feeling a sense of contentment that had been elusive for so long. The holiday season, once overshadowed by their struggles, began to feel like a time of new beginnings. On Christmas Eve, David and Sarah decided to cook a special dinner together. The small kitchen was filled with the aromas of roasted turkey, spiced apple cider, and freshly baked cookies. They moved around each other with ease, their interactions marked by a newfound sense of cooperation and harmony. As they sat down to eat, David raised his glass, his eyes meeting Sarah's. "To us," he said softly, his voice filled with emotion. "To new beginnings and to the love that brought us here." Sarah smiled, her eyes glistening with tears. "To us," she echoed, clinking her glass against his. The dinner was filled with laughter and heartfelt conversation, a stark contrast to the strained meals they had shared in the weeks following Sarah's infidelity. It was a testament to the progress they had made, the strength of their commitment to each other. After dinner, they sat by the fire, wrapped in a cozy blanket, and exchanged gifts. David handed Sarah a small, beautifully wrapped box. Her eyes widened in surprise as she opened it to reveal a delicate silver necklace with a heart-shaped pendant. "David, it's beautiful," she whispered, her voice filled with gratitude. "I wanted to give you something that symbolizes our journey," David explained, his eyes soft with emotion. "The heart represents our love, and the silver is a reminder that even though we've been through tough times, we can still shine." Sarah leaned in to kiss him, her lips soft and warm against his. "Thank you, David. I love it, and I love you." David smiled, feeling a deep sense of satisfaction. "I love you too, Sarah." As the fire crackled and the snow continued to fall outside, they held each other close, feeling a sense of peace and hope for the future. The days passed quickly, and soon it was time to return to Seattle. The drive back was filled with quiet conversation and shared reflections on their time at the cabin. They both felt stronger, more connected, and ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Back in Seattle, they resumed their regular counseling sessions, continuing to work on their communication and trust. The progress they had made at the cabin carried over into their everyday lives, and they found themselves more in tune with each other's needs and feelings. One evening, as they sat on the couch, David turned to Sarah with a thoughtful expression. "I've been thinking about what Dr. Thompson said in our last session," he began. "About creating new traditions together. I think it could be a great way to keep us connected and remind us of the progress we've made." Sarah nodded, her eyes lighting up with interest. "I like that idea. What do you have in mind?" David smiled, feeling a surge of excitement. "How about we start with a monthly date night? We can take turns planning something special, whether it's a dinner at a new restaurant, a hike in the mountains, or even just a movie night at home." Sarah's smile widened. "I love that. It's a wonderful way to keep things fresh and exciting. And it gives us something to look forward to each month." They spent the next few hours brainstorming ideas for their date nights, each suggestion met with enthusiasm and laughter. It felt like they were laying the foundation for a new chapter in their relationship, one built on mutual respect, trust, and a renewed sense of love. As the months passed, their efforts to reconnect bore fruit. They grew closer, their bond strengthened by the challenges they had faced and the commitment they had shown to each other. The wounds of the past began to heal, replaced by a deeper understanding and appreciation for the love they shared. On the anniversary of their first counseling session, David and Sarah decided to revisit the cabin in the mountains. It had become a symbol of their journey, a place where they had found the strength to rebuild their relationship. As they stood by the fire, holding each other close, David felt a sense of gratitude wash over him. They had come a long way, and the future, once filled with uncertainty, now seemed bright and full of promise. "Sarah," he whispered, his voice filled with emotion, "I'm so grateful for you, for us. We've been through so much, and I wouldn't want to face any of it with anyone else." Sarah looked up at him, her eyes shining with love. "I feel the same way, David. Thank you for believing in us, for never giving up. I love you more than words can express." David leaned in to kiss her, feeling a sense of peace and fulfillment. "I love you too, Sarah. Here's to us, to our journey, and to the many more adventures that lie ahead." As the fire crackled and the snow fell softly outside, they held each other close, knowing that together, they could overcome anything. The journey had been long and difficult, but it had brought them closer than ever before. And as they stood there, wrapped in each other's arms, they knew that their love was stronger, deeper, and more resilient than ever. Years later, David and Sarah looked back on their journey with a sense of pride and gratitude. They had faced their darkest moments and emerged stronger, their love renewed and fortified by the challenges they had overcome. Their lives were filled with new traditions, shared dreams, and a deep appreciation for each other. They continued to grow and evolve, their relationship a testament to the power of love, commitment, and the willingness to fight for what truly mattered. As they stood together, hand in hand, they knew that their journey was far from over. But with each other by their side, they were ready to face whatever came their way, confident in the strength of their love and the promise of their future together. And so, their story continued, a beautiful tapestry of love, resilience, and hope, woven together by the threads of their shared experiences and the unwavering bond that held them together. As David and Sarah stood hand in hand, gazing out at the snow-capped mountains, they reflected on the incredible journey they had undertaken. From the depths of betrayal to the heights of renewed trust, their story was a testament to the enduring power of love and the strength found in vulnerability. They had faced their darkest fears and emerged stronger, more connected than ever before. As they embraced the challenges and joys of the future, they knew that their love, fortified by every trial they had overcome, was unbreakable. Together, they walked forward, hearts full of gratitude and hope, ready to embrace whatever lay ahead.